Divorce is complicated. No matter what your circumstances, even if it's like the simplest thing and it's amicable, it's still complicated. One of the circumstances that can be particularly challenging is when the two partners co-own a business together. How on earth do you navigate valuing the asset and dividing it up and all that kind of stuff? We're going to talk about this topic with Laura Paris. She is an associate at Shulman Partners LLP, and she's in Bolton, Ontario today. Hello there.
Hi, Bruce. How are you?
We know people who are married, they're a married couple, and they run a business. They run into trouble, they decide to end that relationship. What are the first questions that you ask when those people come into your office, either together or probably more often solo?
Yeah, so typically they're coming in solo. We're not usually, unless you're dealing with kind of people that are already in an amicable place and they've already come to terms on their own. Usually the first question we want to understand is what's the plan for the business? And this means, are you keeping it? Are you running it together? Are you dissolving it? Are you splitting it? What is the plan for the particular business?
In the case where they say, this is scorched earth, we're selling this thing, how, I guess it depends on the business itself. How do you value that as an asset? Surely money in an RRSP is way easier to get a total on.
Absolutely. So actually, when you're dealing with a sale, it's almost easier because we're going to base it off of fair market value. So because it's jointly owned, we're not necessarily concerned about what the value is as of the date of separation. Whatever it sells for is what it is. And that's the number that we work with for any sort of property division purposes.
But more complicated, I guess, if one is going to buy the other out, because it's not like you've got, the sale of a house with comparables on the street sold in the last 3 months. We can kind of fairly assess what that is. Assessing the value of a business, if one partner is going to buy the other out, is that a complicated process?
So in those circumstances, we enlist business valuators, and business valuators we use not only in circumstances where businesses are jointly owned, but even when there's a solely owned business, because one way or another, we need to understand what that asset is worth. Once we come to an agreement on what the asset is worth, which is sometimes the tricky part, because, valuators value in different ways. Some people will give selective information to get a more favorable value that may benefit them. So once we've come to an agreement on that, then the next step, which actually even falls out of really the family law context, is how are we actually facilitating the division of this? Because that's where you're dealing with a corporate lawyer. There's tax implications and things like that to consider.
I have a very good friend who, him and his partner divorced, they owned a company, and they still run it today. It's probably been 15 years. I don't know how they do it. What is your advice for couples, soon to be former couples, who really want to give that a go?
I think anything's possible when it comes to a separation. You can look at the running of a business from the same angle that you look at taking care of children. If you need to co-parent, the same skills that you put in place to ensure that you're doing that effectively and putting the children's interest first, you apply the same concepts, but to the business. So is it impossible? No, it's absolutely possible, but you need to have the ability to take the emotions of the separation out of it and focus on what the task at hand is, which is running a successful business, which in most cases, especially when both parties are joint owners, is what it's the livelihood that your family relies on. So you hope that people are able to do that, but it's not always that simple.
It feels like this is an area with tons of gray, because we've got, a business that is co-owned by two people. Say they're both consultants and they both, work quite close together and are at the same level professionally. And then there's a business that is principally run by one party and the other might do some administrative tasks or provide bookkeeping support or whatever. I'm sure that second person would like to claim a bigger role. How do you assess and then divide the asset where it's not super clear? It's not like they're 50-50 shareholders in a corporation or something.
If we can't get parties to agree, ultimately what's going to happen is there's going to have to be some dissolving of the corporation and it reopening under some other name. If one party is only really named for, let's say, tax planning purposes, it made sense to income split or whatever the case may be by having that individual named. It does complicate things from a family law perspective because you can use that almost as leverage to say, well, I'm not going to let go of my reins over this business. But in that circumstance, again, this is where we as family lawyers will say we're a little bit out of our depth here. You should consult either a business consultant or a corporate lawyer to see what your options are to be able to potentially wind down this business and reopen under a different umbrella.
In a perfect world, first, no one would ever get divorced. But second, every single couple would have some sort of conversation and some sort of prenup that would set a path if indeed there is marital breakdown. That doesn't happen all the time. But what would be some things that couples could think about, talk about, and maybe institute, paper on before they actually get married, if a business is a part of the circumstance of either couple?
Yeah, so I think particularly in circumstances where a business is intended to be jointly owned, you want to have an understanding of, hey, if we reach this worst case scenario, we're not together anymore, what are we doing with this business? And having those questions answered before you get into a separation and at a time where you still care about each other and emotions aren't involved in that decision is the best thing you can do for yourself. So you want to have an understanding of, is one person going to buy the other person out? If it's going to be run together, how do you foresee that working? Can you perhaps give control to a third party, appoint someone else to run the business where you still maintain other roles within the corporation? So I think all of these things, and again, utilizing other professionals. Will a business consultant at that point be smart to bring in to say, hey, help us figure out what's the best way to plan this? So then we can take that information and take that plan and put it into something like a cohabitation agreement or a marriage contract, so that in the event the relationship doesn't last, that we can just simply refer back to that and not have to again deal with those issues at a time where people are emotionally charged.
Your job includes navigating the nature of the head and the heart, both those two. You can't extricate them. As it relates to business ownership, what are some of the emotional flashpoints or themes that you see time and again?
There's a lot of people treat businesses almost as children. Like they invest everything into their businesses, but whether they're successful or not. And in some circumstances, I can refer back to a case where we had parties who jointly owned a restaurant. This restaurant wasn't even doing well, but they had been working there like that was their family business. Their whole lives, sorry, revolved around this restaurant. There was nostalgia in the building, in the community around the restaurant. It's not that anybody was making so much money off of it. It's not that it even had value. It was nostalgia, and sentimental value. And you see those things coming out in a lot of businesses where it's not just looked at as, this isn't just simply a financial transaction, but it's something we invested our heart and soul into. And those are really big trigger points that are hard to navigate, in oftentimes.
Really interesting stuff, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about what are some really gnarly problems for couples to resolve. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Laura Paris is an associate at Shulman Partners. She joined us to talk about how to think through joint ownership of business as you navigate a divorce.